afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Homecoming Week celebration. We're so excited that you all are here with us today. I am Julie Decker, President and CEO of the FSU Alumni Association, and we have a week-long celebration for homecoming, starting with this special webinar from our Emeritus Alumni Society as we look back in time at the history of Florida State's campus. The Emeritus Alumni Society is our first established and one of our dearest networks. It was created to encourage the continuing interest and participation of alumni who graduated from the university 50 or more years ago. For those of you who have not yet attended an Emeritus event, members of the network enjoy camaraderie, sharing special memories of their time at Florida State, as well as giving back to the university with their time, talent, and treasure. We are so very grateful for them and look forward to seeing them in person again soon. I'm excited to introduce our presenter today, Sandra Varry. Sandra is the Heritage and University Archivist at Florida State University, where she collects, manages, and provides access to FSU's archives and manages its Heritage Museum. She holds an MFA in photography from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and an MLIS from the University of South Florida. She became a certified archivist in 2013 and a digital archive specialist in 2014. She is a recent past chair of the visual materials section of SAA and a past president of the Society of Florida Archivists. She taught traditional and digital photography for 13 years before becoming a full-time archivist specializing in historic photograph collections. Welcome, Sandra. We're so glad you're here today, and I am especially excited about the content you have to share.
Mute myself. I need to unmute myself. There we go. All right. I guess it's good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen and hope that that works well. And make sure that we're up and going. And all right, ta-da. Hopefully that looks good to everyone.
Looks great. You are good to go.
Perfect, perfect. We've got quite the technology setup going at the moment. So I will make sure I've got my little switch. Oh, there we go. All right. So I'm Sandra Varry. I'm the Heritage University Archivist, as was mentioned. We've got a little bit of time to talk about what is a really extensive history at FSU. It was one of the great things about taking this job back in 2013. I used to be over at UCF, and coming here and exploring all the way back into the 1800s has been a really amazing experience. So what I have for today is just looking at campus spaces. We look at a lot of the buildings and the locations, but we don't always think about what that means to our students over time. And so that's something that I'm really interested in. So I selected a few spaces that almost everyone should be really familiar with to just have some fun look at where they were, how they got started, and where they are now. So a little bit about what University Archives is. I won't get too far into that rabbit hole, but we are the official repository for university records and related historical stuff. And what that means is anytime somebody is looking for something that might be in the archive, I'm usually the contact person to go about trying to find that. We also work with records management, so we have a pretty official capacity that way. We also assist the FSU community, so that's everybody. So that's you all as alumni, our community partners, students, faculty, staff. We manage the Heritage Museum over at Dodd Hall. And of course, we work with faculty and students on their research and their projects. So where I want to get started, and I'm a little bit biased, admittedly, since I am part of the libraries, is with our library. It's one of those spaces where thousands and thousands of students make trips through every year and always have. But we didn't always have a library building. We had this space over at the left Starting in the 1890s, when we were the West Florida Seminary, we had a room dedicated as a library. It wasn't its own building. And so that was a pretty amazing space. But by 1903, they were like, hey, we actually need to invest funds in this. And so allocations were made to kind of create an actual collection of books. And while a lot of these don't have photos of students, unfortunately, I can guarantee that they were quite busy at the time, according to how much was in there. So in the 1880s, they also had a library, some of you might be familiar with, which is the Walker Library, which is downtown, which is now a very nice bar. In 1923, we actually built an actual purpose-built library, which is the bottom photo. You might recognize the building outside as Dodd Hall. That was in 1923. That was just a standalone building. The lovely facade that you see in the top photograph actually are additions to that building. The second that it was built, it was full. There were 8,500 volumes in there and they needed more room, so they kept adding on. However, as we grew and grew and grew, and of course, once men were coming back from the war and wanting to come to campus, we had to build another library. So very quickly, this space became WFSU Studio and several other things. And then I'll show you what it turns into later. But the library, as you probably are familiar with it, might have looked more like this. You might be more familiar with Strozier Library, which is up at the top. And of course, it was built in 1956, opened up mostly completely in the 57. And the lower image shows kind of your typical study scene. And it's kind of what we see now, although it's a little bit less neat. We really, really get filled to capacity at certain times during the year. Over on the right is a little bit later in the 70s. But just to give you an idea, when we opened in 56, we had tens of thousands of volumes, but in 1973, we had 1.1 million volumes. And now we have 5.4 million volumes. And we, of course, have a website and electronic databases, and things have really grown since then. Here are a few more images from the 80s and 90s. And you can see what happened to the old library is that it was the studio, and then it became the Claude Pepper Library. And we still have some of those cases and furniture. We still use them. We make use of everything. But this library always stays this kind of community center for students. There's also this concept of kind of like third place, where you have home, you have work, and you have libraries. And so we really build on that, and we build on the fact that no matter what a study area you have, or even if you're not there to study, you might just want to come and hang out and have coffee, that the library is a space for that. And so currently you can see what the library looks like, and it's had many renovations, but you can see down on the left-hand side, that's what finals week looks like now. I don't know what it looked like back in your time whenever you happen to be here, but it gets very crowded and very busy, and students really work hard. And we try to make the spaces conducive to that. And as libraries have changed over time, we've had to kind of think about what it means to have books in spaces and computers in spaces. The lower right-hand side is a very neat and tidy version. That's right after the renovation. As you can imagine, with thousands of students coming through on a regular basis, a lot of wear and tear happens. With all those drinks and coffees and lunches, things get replaced pretty frequently. So, and then here's my definite bias showing, which is that the old library is still, much loved and much well known, and Dodd Hall still looks beautiful. That right side was the original library space. Again, this has been added on to later in the 20s, because again, they immediately needed more space the second they moved in, which always happens. But it has turned into a beautiful museum, and in 2011 was opened as such. And you can see on the bottom right, it's open for study during normal times. We hope to get back to regular hours in the fall. We're currently closed. And on the left, we're open for events. And those events are not just administrative events, they are for students as well. So that's the Women's Leadership Institute. So moving on, Westcott, which of course is our iconic administration building, was built in 1909, and it replaced College Hall. And that was our first big building that we had as a campus, as a seminary. It did not survive. It was eventually condemned, and we had to build Westcott. As you can see, the view from Westcott down the road looks very, very different. And in fact, I really like the tree-lined avenue on the right. But of course, things change and progress happens. But it is a beautiful building. It's had many renovations as well. We added the Ruby Diamond Theater. It's also had issues with facilities and had to be kind of remade off and on over time. But students and faculty have always kind of flocked to the front space of that building, the lawns and the fountain. There are a lot of traditions related to that. As you can see, I know we don't recommend climbing into the tower of the building, but it's a great photograph. And it just kind of shows where students like to explore the physical spaces on campus. The top center image is one that I use frequently. It's a lovely photograph, but it also shows our lovely gates. At one point, the whole front of the building was covered with ivy. I had to kind of take that back a bit. It's beautiful, but it's not great for buildings. But you can see down below in the 40s, this is the 30s and 40s, getting into the fountain, being thrown in the fountain, which I know is also a tradition, and just generally spending time around that space has always been a tradition. I have photographs going back into the teens, and of course the fountain showed up, I believe, in, I want to say 1919. And so since then, it's just been a magnet for that kind of activity. However, we did have a fire in 1969. Some of you might remember, some of you might have been there. I have met several folks who helped pull out records and things from those buildings to help and try and save what was there. And of course, there are a lot more photographs. We actually have a film online that's really wonderful. But Westcott also, is that space where protests have taken place. Again, it's considered an administrative building, but again, it's part of campus and part of our experience. So protests still take place in front of there for various reasons and for various groups. And that's important to remember, that is a place where admin and the students and other part of the campuses interact. But as you can see, again, we have these iconic photos in the front center. This is typical, and I even have family that come visit and they want to go and have their picture taken there. The ring ceremony still goes on, and it's photographed every year. This is some images from the Alumni Society as well. The upper right gives you a nice aerial view, and that's from a few years ago, but it pretty much has stayed the same since. But again, it's just a great space for people to kind of collect and enjoy. And below we have our international students group having their photo taken in front of the fountain. Great traditions that we have. Another one is the Swanny dining room. And many of you, like the library, it's a space that most of us spend some time in. Originally, the room and the hall, again, is similar in style to Dodd Hall in terms of the ceiling and architectural, what is called collegiate Gothic, was built in 1913. And I apologize, but I have a kitty cat who is trying to get in my lap. The joys of working from home. Anyhow, but the dining hall will, of course, probably have many memories for a lot of you. Really beautiful space. Of course, it is now part of the William Johnston building, which was attached later. And of course, on the right are the dining hall girls, who you might have been one or definitely know someone who was a way for women to work during the Florida State College for Women years to pay for room and board. We did not have tuition at that time. We didn't have tuition until the 70s, late 70s. So that's an interesting thing to remember. And then, of course, it also was called the cafeteria a bit later. There was also a lower dining room, which is on the left, and that's something that I had never really seen much about, but do have it in photographs. Thankfully, with renovations, they've saved the ceiling and most of the other aspects of the room that we find really special. But we do have that cafeteria style. You can only imagine that this dining room can not only accommodate so many people at one time. If you've gone to visit, even now, it's very, very busy. So there are other dining spaces on campus at this point, but Swanny dining room usually holds a special place in most people's hearts. And when they come to visit, do want to go and try to have lunch or at least come by. And of course, now it's been renovated several times. 2006 over on the left. Really, it's really just a moving through the center of the space and kind of reimagining it. Again, thankfully, our ceilings have stayed. There are no floating ceilings in there. Our lights got changed this time a couple times, so I like what's there now. At first, they had some very bright ones that were a little hard to work with, but these are very lovely. And it's a different kind of space, but again, it has to function. But student groups still come by to eat lunch. I've actually eaten lunch in there recently, or not recently, but right before the pandemic. And I enjoyed the space. It took a little getting used to it first because it's different, but that's what happens. And so another that we wanted to take a look at is another place that most all of us have probably been to, is the Res Lakefront Park and Retreat, which is the current naming. And things get named differently over time. It started out really as Lake Bradford, which is what it is. But it was also a place that the women from Florida State College for Women, as well as the faculty and staff, could go down to kind of just have a recreation space. And about 1916, the university decided, hey, we want to make this an official part of our campus, and they purchased several acres to do that. And then it was decided a little bit later that it would be called Camp Flostacoa, and that was brought up by Susan Coffin, and you'll of course know Coffin Hall. So funds were raised, and then they started adding amenities so that everybody could use it. And I have many, many, many wonderful scrapbooks in our collection, and for every student, there are at least a couple photos of them or their friends at Camp Flostacoa on Lake Bradford, enjoying themselves, swimming, canoeing, etc. The deal is, though, that it is quite a hike, and women would walk down, and they did also, though, have a truck that would take them down in groups. And so that's an image of that on the left. It looked like they would just kind of pile on and go for it, because it would be kind of a walk. Some other things that might be familiar are, of course, the camp part itself, and of course, the small boathouse and dock. The amenities have grown quite a bit. We are at 73 acres now. We started out with a few, but with lots of add-ons and lots of purchase of property to kind of expand. It allowed for physical education classes to be taken there, canoeing, in addition to recreation. The Tarpon Club, who some of you might be familiar with, practice down there. So it has a lot of fond memories for a lot of people, and it's a really beautiful space that I'm glad that we have. The center photo is pretty iconic. I can find a photo like that from every period of time all the way back to the teens, but I thought that one kind of made sense. Down on the left, it's typical for faculty and staff to have retreats down at the Res, which is what we most commonly called it. It was officially called the FSU Reservation in 1947. We kind of shortened it to the Res, and now, of course, it's been added on to a little bit with the park and retreat. To the right, there was a fairly recent photograph when it kind of was at its height around in the 60s, really just where the dock and the boathouse were kind of the main facilities. And then now, obviously, this is spread out quite a lot. You may have seen that there are a lot of other activities there that you can do. I think there's a ropes course and some other things as well. So for Landis Green, which is one that I was really interested in finding out more about the history of, it wasn't really called Landis Green until later, until Landis Hall was built. However, the picture on the left is the oldest photo that I have that really is kind of focused just on it as a space. And the tree that we're looking at there is actually the one that's in front of Strozier Library, which is amazing. It's such a wonderful tree, and I hope that it stays with us a good bit longer. But as you can see, we just have kind of rolling fields. You can see the William Johnston building off in the distance. The dining hall is on the south end of that. From what I've read, it seemed that it wasn't used as much as you might think. Apparently it got muddy really easily, though on the south end of it, or I'm sorry, on the north end near the dormitories, apparently there was this girls only smoking area for quite some time, which I think was funny. I hear little stories and I try to write them down. One of my favorite and most iconic images are the archers above. So it did get some use in that regard, but you can see in the later 40s down in the lower right hand side, that's kind of about how it stayed for a long time before walkways were put in, and then of course the fountain that we're used to. Let's see what else we got. But Landis changes. It's really it's whatever students make it out to be. A lot of times, like we do have organized events. Of course, there's ice cream social every year. certain things that happen on a good weather day. There are tons and tons of students out. But really it is a community space that everyone enjoys. As you can see in the middle, that's from the 1970s. It's actually the year I was born. I won't tell you when. But that, staff can come out. I often come out from the library when you get cold inside the library, and then we come out and warm up and we sit out around the trees. Over on the left, some of our international students were visiting in February of 1958, which you may or may not remember, was a snowstorm, which I have yet to see in Tallahassee. I've been here a while now, and I really would like a snowstorm. Don't curse me, but it sounds like fun, at least once or twice. I grew up in Indiana, so I like those things. But over on the right is a 60s and 70s, very typical scene of students hanging out. And of course, there are sometimes that there are protests as well. You can see the library off in the distance as kind of the anchor across from Landis. And it's kind of stayed this way. You can see from the aerial view, it's a little more organized. They put in concrete walkways, which is great. Still get some muddy spots in there that they have to put turf over. But it's a great space, and students, they congregate and enjoy themselves there. And then the fountain that's over on the right, and then the building Landis, which the green is named after, that was added much later. And occasionally you will see it with soap in at facilities. Would prefer that doesn't happen, but kids are having fun sometimes. So for the student union, the earliest student union is actually the Longmayer Building, and it was designed with the idea that student government would be there. It would be a space for visitors and alumni to come. It also had their publication, the first publications office was here. And my favorite photo is this one on the right, which is from the, I believe, late 50s, where this is the Beth Moore Lounge, and you may remember spending time there. The rug on the floor is still there, believe it or not. We look into ways about how to preserve it pretty regularly. It is pretty amazing. That space is mostly reserved for events these days, but it is still there. It's a great space. But like a lot of buildings that are purpose-built, as soon as it was finished, it was really kind of overflowing. And as we continued to grow, we needed more space. So we built some. We're really good at that. So the Florida State University Student Center was built in 1952 and immediately had, I believe, a jukebox, a snack bar, a room for dancing, which later became a post office, and quite a bit in terms of amenities. So that allowed for Longmyer Hall, the building there, to have a little breathing room and for students to kind of start migrating towards this union space, which then becomes the union complex. I mean, it gets pretty big. We only had, I think at the Student Center, we had about 5,000 students in 1952 compared to our 40,000 now, which is quite a lot. But we continued to expand. And so for big expansions, the University Union, which is what it was called later in 1964, is when we start adding all these big buildings. But it just allows for students to have more space. Of course, student government is moving in there. We add office spaces and ballroom spaces. And my personal favorite, which is the Crenshaw Lanes. I did get to at least bowl there a couple times before it was moved. I'm excited to see what the new ones will hold. The Union Complex, which is an interesting kind of concept, is where we kind of look at how buildings start to get added. So there's the Crenshaw Building, Davis Building, Moore Auditorium, the Turner Building. FSU Student Life Center is kind of considered part of that corridor. And so we actually have a really massive student union, so to speak. Major renovations took place in like 1998, 95, 2001, 2006. There was another one. And of course, now we're looking forward to having a new and amazing space that will replace 75% of the old buildings. The Moore Auditorium will stay. However, hopefully some of our new spaces will provide the same kind of opportunities for students to congregate. So Market Wednesdays are a wonderful tradition. So down on the right, this is right before we closed finally, before demolition was starting, which is great. I don't know how it was over time, but I know I've enjoyed going to visit. A lot of great music, dancing, a lot of the different sororities and fraternities coming out. It's a great experience. But again, it's another space similar to kind of how Linda Screen functions now, where students can have activities and come together to do what's important to them. And then, of course, hopefully, cross your fingers that we're all on track for 2022, when the new union, which will be a big departure if you look at over the time from going from the Longmayer Building to now, will be a big change. But there is a new union.fsu.edu site that I highly recommend that you go to. You can see renderings of what the inside will look like over time. So for me, and this is a very quick presentation about a few spaces. What it doesn't get a chance to say is that our collections are really extensive. We have hundreds of thousands of photographs and images, and that doesn't even get into the records and the other things. As somebody with a background in photography and art history, I easily get lost in what we have to offer in terms of being able to look at our campus and our spaces and the people and students that make it really important. So I highly recommend, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. If I don't know the answer, I will find it for you. But also just know that you can enjoy a lot of this online. You're also welcome to come and visit. But I always have a hard time with these presentations because I want to put way more in them than we have time for. So that being said, I'm keeping this to about, I guess, our 20-25 minutes-ish. So that we have some time for questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Sandra. I want to make sure on your screen, can you see me or can you just hear me?
I can see you.
Perfect. Well, we're golden then. So tell me what you look for in photographs when you're going through things that might be submitted to you. What are you really looking for? Are you taking anything that someone may submit to the museum?
So for us, it really depends on the time period and it depends on the creator. So we are obligated in some ways to take a lot of the materials that are created by the institution itself. So University of Communications produces tens of thousands of images. So periodically we will transfer those materials to the archive as part of what we do. But then there are donor collections that come in. And so I really have to look at, well, how does it complement the material that we already have? So if somebody's doing research or wants to experience, times past, how does that affect what I pick? With digital, we have to be careful because, of course, digital is so much more ubiquitous than the original print photographs. And so we do have to be a little bit more selective because we have to take care of it. So one of the things that we do as archivists is that for the most part, we take care of things in perpetuity. And so we have to make sure that when we agree to do that, that we can accomplish that goal, there's a trust that's needed there. But we have a lot of great collections. One of my favorites that I've gotten since I've been here is Barry Matan's collection. And he was here 60s and 70s, and I'm sure some of you might have known him. He was really wonderful, and he was actually donating his collection, extensive collection of campus photos and other photos before he passed away suddenly. And then his widow donated the rest of his collection. So, and that's been just for students doing research, especially in looking at the environment, looking at protests and looking at student activities, it's been a really valuable collection. So that's a good example.
Very interesting. We do have some questions submitted.
Sure.
So I'm going to go through those. The fire in Westcott, tell us again what year that was. I think you mentioned, but I can't remember. We did have someone ask as well. Tell us what year that was and a little bit more about that. You mentioned people were volunteering to bring things out. I think
yes,
many on this call may remember that too, but I'd love to hear some more.
So that was 1969. And like I said, I've met several folks who were there and told me stories about going in. And so my understanding is that it was an electrical fire in the attic area. I don't know all of the details of the fire itself, but I do have photographs of it. We do have a movie that is online if you want to watch. But students do, on one hand, we have students students protesting, but those same students are also like, we have to save the building and the records. And they're running in and bringing out file cabinets and, helping drag hoses in. And so I think it's a good show of the kind of campus that we are, that all those things can exist together and that we care about our things. Now, the downside is that we lost a lot of records from our early institutional history. So we do have limited, but some from like our West Seminary and our Florida State College years, which were 1904, 1905, that little tiny part where we were co-ed for a while and then weren't co-ed again.
Right.
We don't have a lot, so we did lose some things there, but there is a great video. So if you go to our website, you can go into our digital library. It's actually, I think, 4 or 5 different clips from that year, and it shows campus, and it's no sound, but it's wonderful to watch. It's mesmerizing.
Wow, very good. We'll have to find those links and possibly share those. Okay. When were cars prohibited from driving around the fountain at Westcott? Today, it's obviously pedestrian only with the alumni bricks, but cars, I think, were allowed to drive around there.
They were for quite a long time. That is a good question. I'd have to look and see. I have photos of them there all the time because what they would do is pull up the blockers that they have there for security, and then they would ride through to do different things. So I'd probably have to find out when the brick program started, because I'm guessing they've really, really cut back. But I think part of it too is just general security. As much as we love that space and students love to go there for graduation, always have, I think they just had for safety.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess it started in probably the 90s, but I would have to check to make sure.
Okay. Interesting. Very good. So what format for pictures is preferred? And, we have a lot of alumni on this call, and obviously talk to a lot of alumni. And secretly, this is one of my favorite things at a museum like this with heritage from a university and how these things can be displayed. What format's preferred? What do you want alumni to share with you if they find?
I want it all, but no, I can't have it all. But I'm a little bit of a purist, so I love my hard copy photographs. I learned and taught in the darkroom, so I am definitely an originals person. As an archivist, the same thing rings true. Originals are preferred simply because of the quality and our ability to preserve them. Then they're easier to be shared over time. But that's not saying I wouldn't turn down some awesome digital copies of things that we don't have. So, but ideally, that's that. Digital is the way it is now. So like I mentioned with university communications collections, those are high quality digital images, and that's what we take because that's what they are these days. So I take most things, but the big goal is that I can preserve it and that I can share it. With archives, if you can't find it and you don't know about it, then we're not really doing what we need to do.
Right. Speaking of sharing, I had a question and somebody emailed this into us. So do you have a rotation of display that alumni can come and peruse? Like, is there, this quarter we're displaying stuff from this era, or is there a way that alumni can come and look at some of this stuff?
Absolutely. So when the museum is open again in the fall, we will have regular hours. We are almost always open for special hours during homecoming if you're here to visit. However, at any time you can get in touch and say, hey, I'm going to come and visit, and I would love to see photos in yearbooks from when I was in school. That's our bread and butter. We do that. Yeah. So we will pull out materials from the archive because everything's in secured storage for preservation purposes and for safety so that we can keep it. But they can always do that. As long as we have a little bit of advanced time, it's usually a lot of fun. And I really enjoy that the most when y'all come visit me. And I'm over at Strozier most of the time. Now, the museum being open, we have a permanent exhibit that goes around the whole room that was recently updated just before the pandemic. And then there's a set of cases at the far end of the room that are those 80s cases that are still there, but they've been stained and they're pretty. We do rotating exhibits there, and it's based on themes. So it depends on what's happening. We do work with graduate students. We do work with different units who are having anniversaries. So it really just kind of depends, but we try to switch it out several times a year. So that's usually new. Something that we've done during our pandemic time is that we've created an online virtual exhibit of the museum's permanent exhibit. And so we can share that link as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think I would say 90% of everything that's in the museum visually, not the beautiful collegiate Gothic ceiling and stained glass, unfortunately, but the rest of the content is there. We've been adding some more new photos and things. But yeah, we would love to have visits at any time, and it can be group visits too. So it's not uncommon for a group to call and say, hey, I have a group of 4 or 5 of us who lived in the same dorm. I actually do have a group of guys that come every year. And we go on a little campus tour, like we go to the museum, we go to the library, and we hang out and chat. And they've been friends since the 70s. So,
Oh, how great.
so that's not uncommon. And I'm more than happy to do that. That's fun for me.
Well, Sandra, you are giving me all sorts of ideas. I'm sure my staff and my team that are on this call too can see my wheels spinning, because these types of programs and what they can share with people, bringing back their memories and educating our young alumni on things about campus from the past, I think is wonderful. And I think this was such a great presentation. I have more questions. What about when Longmyer was first used as the law school? Do you have pictures of when Longmyer was used as a law school? What time period was that?
I think we probably do. I would have to hunt them down, but I can.
Yeah.
I'm going to take notes too. So whoever you are, question askers, I will follow up with those questions. So
yes, and we'll link to our follow-up. Those of you who are joining us today, we'll send out, you usually get a survey following, so we'll send out some links.
I've got the car question because I want to know now.
Yeah.
And Longmyer photos, I'm sure I can find. The trick I was having with Longmyer is I found a lot of great building photos. I was having a hard time finding interior photos. But I think that they're there. So what we have digitized is a fraction of what we have. So I like to go hunting in there.
Very good. That's fun. That in the Beth Moore Lounge is where we had our final board meeting before COVID, because many wanted to have it in that space. So seeing that picture, having just had our last in-person board meeting in that space, was quite special. It's an amazing piece of history. Here's another question from Charles. How did the campus respond to the 1918 pandemic?
So interestingly enough, it seemed that they were fairly isolated. There was a bit of, there definitely was a little ward that was set up for some students who were ill. And we had a little bit of that early Red Cross kind of situation going on. But a lot of things went into town. And so if you look at the newspaper at the time, it wasn't mentioned as much as you would think. I was kind of surprised because when the pandemic kind of started getting rolling just a little over a year ago, we really wanted to know. We were like, well, what happened last time? And I was surprised that it wasn't as extensive as you would think. And that makes sense. We were a very small campus then. Really just a group of buildings in the Pines and a farm that was pretty extensive. The farm was getting going then with the dairy farm. So I think it was impactful, but less impactful than we might have expected.
So here's a good question. What happened to the non-automated bowling alley in the basement, maybe in Dodd, from the mid-1960s?
Ooh.
These are good questions.
That's a good question. That one's a little bit of a slumber.
I saw the participant list. We have a good group on this.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, that's why I asked. I was like, oh, I wonder who's going to be on there, because some of them I'm sure I know. And then
yes.
But it's always fun. It's fun to get questions. I'm gonna look at that one, because the only one that I know of is the Crenshaw one. I've seen other photos, but what happens sometimes is that the person that sees the photos later, when they're describing them, doesn't realize that there was another space, and they think that it's the same space and label it as Crenshaw.
Interesting.
So that's a good question. But yeah,
very good.
Yeah, it's on my list.
Good. Okay, do you have yearbooks from every year?
Almost. And they are all online and digitized. However, there are certain periods where yearbooks were not produced. So right around World War I, World War II. And then when you get into the 70s, things start to get a little abstract and kind of fun and a little different. And that's normal in most universities. But the production of yearbooks kinds of changes and slows. And then in the 80s, there's kind of a hit and miss. So every yearbook that I have ever been able to find is digitized and online. So if you look for, I think the earliest one that I have is 1901. So that's
Wow.
actually the Argo, and it's the first year's transition between the West Seminary of Florida and the Florida State College. And so they're really beautiful. They're really interesting. Very tiny classes of, less than 50 people. Sometimes
Wow.
just 10 or 12 a class, very small, but beautiful photographs. One of my favorite editions is actually, there's some anniversary editions in the 30s that are beautiful printing. And that just kind of goes on. If you look at yearbooks, and then we can find from the teens to the 50s scrapbooks from the same period, it's really a lot of fun. We also have the Flambeau online from 1915 until the 80s, and then I have most of the rest in print. So you can get, just like I get lost in the photos, I will get lost in the Flambeau. Somebody will ask for something and I'll be like, oh, I know it's in that year. And then I'll just be like paging through. Just the advertisements alone will entertain for hours and hours.
I was at the office last night looking at a 1964 tally-ho for much too long, and then decided I needed to close it. Well, wonderful. There are a lot of questions about how to see archive photos. We'll share those links. You can see those online and go through all of those. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for all that you have shared with us. Your cat has enjoyed it, and I have braved having 2 dogs in my office during this. So I think we both got away unscathed.
I had to put my dog in her bed for this because she would have been way too excited.
Yes. Well, with that, we are just so thankful for all of you joining us today. We look forward to seeing our emeritus in person this fall for homecoming weekend, honoring the classes of 1970 and 1971. We missed seeing you this year so much, and we are so eager to get together and celebrate again. Emeritus have shown themselves to be some of the most dedicated members of the Seminole family, and the FSU Alumni Association thanks you for that service. As a member-based organization, thank you for those of you who are members of the Alumni Association. If you wish to become a member, you can always visit our website, and we thank you for your continued support. For a list of homecoming activities, visit our website, join us this week. You don't want to miss TEDx later this week with our students sharing their big ideas, faculty and alumni speakers as well. So much going on, and we look forward to seeing you in person soon. And as always, go Noles.